Dr. Bessel van der Kolk begins The Body Keeps the Score by sharing his personal journey as a psychiatrist working with trauma survivors. His early experiences with Vietnam War veterans deeply impacted him and sparked a lifelong quest to understand how trauma reshapes not just the mind, but the very structure and functioning of the brain and body. These veterans, decades after the war, were still haunted by their experiences, trapped in cycles of flashbacks, nightmares, and emotional numbing. What struck Dr. van der Kolk was that traditional talk therapy and medication often failed to bring real relief. The pain of the past lived on inside them, not just as memories but as physical sensations and emotional reactions that refused to fade. As he expanded his research and clinical practice, van der Kolk encountered trauma in many forms, not only in combat veterans, but in survivors of childhood abuse, domestic violence, accidents, and natural disasters. He came to realize that trauma is far more prevalent than society tends to acknowledge. Behind many psychiatric diagnoses, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, even physical health problems, often lies a history of unprocessed trauma. Importantly, he explains that trauma is not just a psychological issue to be solved with conversation or reasoning. Trauma is stored in the body. It changes how the brain perceives danger, regulates emotion, and interacts with the world. Neurological studies revealed that trauma can shut down areas of the brain responsible for speech and decision-making while amplifying the fear center, the amygdala. This means that when a traumatized person is triggered, their body reacts as if the danger is still present, even if, logically, they know they're safe. This disconnect between the logical brain and the emotional brain is central to trauma's hold over people. And it is this understanding that drives van der Kolk's approach throughout the book. Healing trauma requires more than just insight. It requires engaging the body, reestablishing a sense of safety, and finding ways to reconnect with oneself and others. His introduction sets the stage for a powerful exploration of how trauma imprints itself on the human system and how healing is possible through innovative body-centered methods. Chapter 1. Lessons from Vietnam Veterans. In the early days of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's career, he encountered a group of patients who would challenge everything he thought he knew about psychiatry, Vietnam War veterans. These men were not just haunted by bad memories, they were trapped in the past. Years after returning home, they still found themselves pulled back into combat zones by invisible forces. A sudden loud noise, the smell of diesel, or a crowded street could catapult them into a full-body flashback. Their hearts would race, their muscles tense, their minds hijacked by terror. Van der Kolk was struck by how vividly these veterans relived their trauma, as if time had frozen at the moment of horror. Unlike the typical emotional wounds people speak about, trauma wasn't just a memory. They were re-experiencing it in real time. It was not just psychological, it was visceral, physical. Their bodies held onto the past in ways that defied simple explanation. Back then, the term PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, had just entered the psychiatric vocabulary, born from the observations of mental health professionals working with returning soldiers. What van der Kolk saw convinced him that this was not just a disorder of the mind, it was a full-body crisis. Nightmares, insomnia, emotional numbing, and aggressive outbursts weren't signs of weakness. They were symptoms of a brain and body locked in survival mode. These veterans weren't choosing to be angry or detached. They were stuck in a constant state of high alert. At the time, treatments for PTSD were limited and often ineffective. Talk therapy helped some, but many veterans found it unbearable to speak about what had happened. Medications dulled their emotions, but did little to relieve the root cause. The medical model focused heavily on diagnosing and prescribing, but few were asking the deeper question, what exactly does trauma do to a person? Van der Kolk began to search for answers beyond the surface. He studied brain scans, listened closely to his patients, and started noticing patterns. Trauma disrupted memory, rewired emotional circuits, and altered how people processed reality. For trauma survivors, the brain's fear center, the amygdala, was in overdrive, while the parts responsible for reasoning and language were often shut down during distress. This explained why so many veterans couldn't put their experiences into words, why they felt confused, overwhelmed, or even ashamed of their reactions. One of the most powerful realizations Vander Kolk had was that these men weren't crazy. Their minds and bodies were simply reacting to extreme experiences in the only way they knew how, by staying alert to danger at all costs. This was the brain's survival instinct doing its job, but in a world where the danger was no longer present, it became a prison. Through his work with Vietnam veterans, Vander Kolk began to understand trauma as a disorder of memory and time. The past doesn't stay in the past for trauma survivors. It invades the present, hijacks their reality, and makes it nearly impossible to live fully in the moment. This chapter marks the beginning of his journey toward rethinking trauma, not as a weakness, but as a deeply human response to overwhelming experiences, and searching for new, more compassionate ways to help survivors reclaim their lives. Chapter 2: Revolutions in Understanding Mind and Brain. For much of the 20th century, the field of psychiatry was dominated by two main approaches: the Freudian model of uncovering unconscious conflicts through talk therapy, and the behaviorist model, which focused on modifying observable actions through rewards and punishments. These methods helped some patients, but when it came to trauma, especially the kind that seemed embedded deep within the body, something was missing. Dr. Bessel Vander Kolk realized this gap early in his work with trauma survivors. Many of his patients could not simply talk their way out of their symptoms. They understood that the war was over, that the abuse had ended, that they were safe in the present, but their bodies didn't seem to get the message. They flinched at harmless sounds, couldn't sleep, felt chronically unsafe. Their minds and bodies seemed disconnected. Something deeper was at play, something rooted in biology. Then came a revolutionary breakthrough: brain imaging technology. Tools like fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, and PT scans allowed researchers for the first time to observe the living, active brain in real time. Vander Kolk and his colleagues began to use this technology to study people with PTSD, and what they found changed everything. When trauma survivors were exposed to reminders of their traumatic events, such as sounds, images, or guided imagery, their brain activity changed dramatically. The amygdala, the brain's alarm system, would light up instantly, triggering intense fear and stress. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning, self-control, and decision-making, would go offline. This explained why trauma survivors often couldn't think clearly or calm themselves when triggered. Their brains were reacting as if the danger was happening right now. Even more striking was what happened to the Broca's area, a region of the brain associated with speech and language. When trauma survivors were reliving their traumatic memories, this area would go dark. They literally could not find words for what they were feeling. This was why so many patients found it difficult, or impossible, to describe their trauma. Their brains were overwhelmed, disconnected from language, locked in a nonverbal, survival-based state. This scientific insight confirmed what Vander Kolk had long suspected. Trauma is not just a psychological experience, it is a neurobiological condition. The brain and body get stuck in survival mode, and traditional therapies that rely solely on talking or logical thinking often fall short. This new understanding marked a turning point. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with you?" psychiatrists and therapists began asking, "What happened to you?" The focus shifted from fixing behavior to rebuilding the brain's ability to feel safe, to regulate emotions, and to reconnect with the present. Vander Kolk was deeply inspired by this shift. It opened the door to new, body-centered treatments like EMDR, yoga, neurofeedback, and somatic experiencing, which aim to heal trauma by working with the body, not against it. These treatments bypass the thinking mind and go straight to the source, the nervous system, the sensory memory, and the brain pathways altered by trauma. This chapter marks a revolution not just in psychiatry, but in our entire approach to healing. Trauma is not just a story from the past. It is a wound in the brain and body that must be addressed with compassion, science, and creativity. And most importantly, healing is possible, not by erasing the past, but by reshaping the way the brain and body respond to it. Chapter 3. Looking into the Brain, Neuroscience of Trauma. As Dr. van der Kolk delved deeper into the biology of trauma, one truth became increasingly clear. Trauma doesn't just live in the mind, it reshapes the brain itself. Thanks to brain imaging technology, we now understand that traumatic experiences leave distinct, measurable imprints on specific parts of the brain. These changes explain why trauma survivors often feel stuck, overwhelmed, or detached from reality. 3 key areas of the brain are most affected by trauma: the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, and the hippocampus. Each of these plays a vital role in how we process emotions, memories, and our sense of safety. Let's begin with the amygdala, the brain's alarm system. It constantly scans the environment for threats, triggering the fight, flight, or freeze response whenever danger is detected. In a healthy brain, the amygdala alerts us to real threats, like a car speeding toward us, and quiets down once the danger is over. But in trauma survivors, this system becomes overly sensitive. Even minor triggers, like a loud noise or a facial expression, can set off a full-scale alarm. The amygdala goes into overdrive, flooding the body with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. This explains why so many trauma survivors feel constantly on edge. Their brains are wired to expect danger, even when none exists. Now consider the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of the brain. It helps us make decisions, regulate emotions, and assess what's real and what's not. Ideally, the prefrontal cortex acts like a wise, calm guide who tells the amygdala, "It's okay, you're safe." But when a person is triggered by trauma, this region often goes offline. Logical thinking is overridden by fear. This disconnect explains why trauma survivors may know they're safe, yet still feel terrified. Their emotional brain hijacks the situation, silencing their reasoning abilities. Finally, we have the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for sorting and storing memories. In a non-traumatized brain, the hippocampus organizes memories with a clear beginning, middle, and end. But under extreme stress, this system breaks down. Traumatic memories become fragmented, jumbled, and often replayed in vivid detail. The brain fails to recognize that the trauma is over, causing the person to relive the event again and again as if it's happening in the present. This neurological chaos explains many classic symptoms of PTSD: flashbacks, nightmares, emotional numbing, and dissociation. Trauma survivors often feel haunted by their past because their brains never properly recorded the trauma as over. Instead, it loops endlessly in their body and mind. Van der Kolk emphasizes that this isn't a matter of willpower or weakness. It's brain science. Trauma literally rewires the brain to focus on survival at the expense of everything else. Joy, connection, learning, and creativity all take a back seat when the brain is constantly scanning for danger. But there's hope. The brain is plastic. It can change. With the right tools and therapies, the brain can learn to regulate itself again. Treatments like mindfulness, neurofeedback, yoga, EMDR, and safe relationships can help calm the amygdala, strengthen the prefrontal cortex, and reprocess traumatic memories stored in the hippocampus. In this chapter, van der Kolk lays the foundation for trauma-informed healing. By understanding how trauma disrupts the brain's balance, we begin to see why so many traditional methods fall short, and why true recovery requires an approach that includes both the body and the brain. Chapter 4. The Imprint of Trauma. Trauma doesn't fade like ordinary memories. It imprints itself deep into the brain and body, often beyond conscious awareness. For survivors, trauma becomes a state of being, a persistent tension, a feeling of being unsafe, even when no danger is present. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk describes this not as a mental scar, but more like a fire alarm that never turns off. The body stays alert, the mind remains on edge, and ordinary life can feel foreign, even threatening. When a traumatic event occurs, the body reacts instantly, heart racing, breathing shallow, muscles tightening. This is the fight-or-flight response, and it's essential in life-threatening situations. But the trauma response often doesn't shut down, even after the danger passes. The brain and body become locked in a loop of hyper-arousal, always watching, always ready to react. Survivors may feel easily startled, irritable, or panicked without knowing why. This state of chronic stress is exhausting and can lead to long-term health problems like insomnia, high blood pressure, and immune dysfunction. One of the most painful aspects of trauma is the flashback. Unlike ordinary memories, flashbacks are not remembered. They are relived. A smell, a sound, or a glance can transport someone back into the traumatic event, complete with the same emotions, physical sensations, and terror they felt in the original moment. It's as if time collapses and the past becomes the present again. The brain's fear center lights up, while the rational brain goes offline, just like it did during the trauma itself. These episodes can be overwhelming and deeply confusing, especially for those who can't explain what triggered them. Another way the brain reacts to trauma is through dissociation. This is the mind's emergency escape hatch. When the pain or terror becomes unbearable, the brain shuts off certain functions, numbing the person from emotional or physical experience. Survivors might feel like they're floating outside their body, watching events from a distance or losing track of time. For children who endure chronic abuse, dissociation can become a regular survival strategy. They might withdraw into imaginary worlds or go emotionally blank. While this helps them survive unbearable moments, it often makes it harder to connect with others or process emotions later in life. Van der Kolk describes trauma as a wordless sense of doom. This isn't poetic exaggeration, it's literal. Because the brain's language center often shuts down during trauma, survivors may not have words to explain what they feel. Their bodies remember the pain, but they struggle to describe it. This leads to feelings of confusion, shame, and isolation. Yet this chapter doesn't just dwell on the pain, it also begins to reveal the path to healing. If trauma lives in the body, then the body must be part of the cure. Therapies that engage the body, not just the mind, can help survivors regain control, safety, and a sense of presence. Practices like yoga, breathwork, safe touch, and movement help people reconnect with themselves. Instead of being hijacked by flashbacks or shut down by dissociation, they learn to feel grounded in the present moment. This chapter is a turning point in the book. It reframes trauma not as something to get over, but as something that can be transformed by working with the body's wisdom, rebuilding the mind-body connection, and slowly teaching the nervous system that it is safe again. Chapter 5. Developmental Trauma. When we think of trauma, we often imagine a singular, terrifying event, an accident, a war, a natural disaster. But some of the most devastating wounds don't come from what happened once. They come from what didn't happen over and over again. Nurture, protection, love. These invisible wounds, often caused by childhood abuse and neglect, are known as developmental trauma. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk explains that the early years of life are crucial. The human brain is still under construction, wiring itself in response to the caregiving environment. A child learns to regulate emotions, trust others, and feel safe in their body through relationships. If those relationships are unstable, violent, or absent, the child doesn't just suffer emotionally, their brain development is deeply affected. Imagine a child growing up in a home where yelling, hitting, or emotional coldness is routine. The child's body is constantly in survival mode. The brain's alarm system, the amygdala, becomes overactive, while the areas responsible for calming and reasoning, the prefrontal cortex, are underused. Over time, the child learns that the world is unpredictable and dangerous. But even more heartbreaking is when a child learns that they are unworthy of love or safety. Neglect can be just as harmful as abuse. When caregivers are emotionally unavailable or unresponsive, children may stop reaching out altogether. They withdraw, numb themselves, or develop deep-seated feelings of shame. The message they receive isn't just, "You are not safe," it's "You don't matter." These early experiences form the blueprint for attachment styles. Secure attachment is built when a child feels seen, soothed, safe, and supported. But trauma creates insecure attachment, anxious, avoidant, or disorganized styles. Anxiously attached individuals may cling to others, terrified of abandonment. Avoidant ones may push people away, believing they can't rely on anyone. Disorganized attachment, often the result of abuse by a caregiver, leaves the person feeling trapped. The one they need is also the one they fear. This impacts every area of emotional development. Children with developmental trauma often struggle with attention, impulse control, and emotional regulation. They may be labeled difficult, hyperactive, or defiant in school, when in reality they are doing their best to survive with a nervous system that never learned to feel safe. As they grow older, relationships remain confusing, threatening, or overwhelming. They may crave intimacy, yet sabotage it. They may seek love in all the wrong places, or stop seeking it entirely. Van der Kolk makes it clear, developmental trauma shapes a person's entire experience of themselves and the world, but it's not irreversible. Healing begins by creating new experiences of safety and connection. Therapy, especially approaches that focus on the body and relational healing, can help rewire the brain. Safe relationships, whether with a therapist, a partner, or a friend, can begin to undo the damage. The nervous system learns, slowly, that not all touch is dangerous. Not all closeness leads to pain. Not all love ends in abandonment. The child within each trauma survivor still longs for safety and love. The good news is that, through healing work, that child can be met with compassion and given what was once missing, not by changing the past, but by transforming the present. Chapter 6. The Hidden Epidemic. Most people think trauma is rare, something that happens to others in war zones or catastrophic accidents. But in reality, childhood trauma is far more common than we dare to admit. It hides in plain sight, affecting millions, shaping personalities, damaging health, and distorting futures. In this chapter, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk introduces us to one of the most important studies in modern medicine, the ACE study, which exposed the silent epidemic of trauma in our society. The Adverse Childhood Experiences ACE study, conducted in the 1990s by Dr. Vincent Felitti and Dr. Robert Anda, began almost by accident. While treating patients for obesity, Dr. Felitti noticed something strange. Many of his patients had histories of sexual abuse, neglect, or emotional trauma. These weren't just isolated cases, they were patterns. Together with the CDC, he launched a massive study involving over 17,000 participants to explore the connection between childhood experiences and adult health. The results were staggering. Participants were asked if they had experienced 10 types of adversity during their childhood, such as physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, neglect, parental divorce, substance abuse in the home, domestic violence, or mental illness in a parent. For every yes, they received 1 ACE point. What researchers found was that the higher a person's ACE score, the greater their risk of serious health problems later in life. An ACE score of 4 or more significantly increased the risk of depression, alcoholism, drug abuse, suicide attempts, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and even early death. People with high ACE scores were more likely to engage in risky behaviors, struggle with relationships, and experience chronic illness. The body, it turned out, doesn't just forget trauma. It records it, cell by cell, system by system. What shocked even the researchers was just how common these adverse experiences were. 2/3 of all participants reported at least one ACE, and these were not people living in extreme poverty or war zones. They were mostly white, middle class, and educated. Proof that trauma does not discriminate. It cuts across every race, class, and background. Van der Kolk refers to childhood trauma as a hidden epidemic because its effects are not always visible on the surface. A child who grows up with a depressed mother or a violent father might still go to school, smile for photos, and appear normal. But inside, their nervous system is flooded with stress. Their body learns to expect chaos. Their brain forms pathways around fear, shame, and vigilance. These wounds go unnoticed for years, sometimes decades, until they show up in the form of anxiety, addiction, failed relationships, or chronic pain. The ACE study changed the landscape of how we understand trauma. It showed that childhood experiences are not just memories, they are biological injuries that impact our health, behavior, and lifespan. And the cost is enormous, not just personal, but societal. Billions are spent every year treating the physical and mental consequences of unhealed trauma. But if trauma is this common, then healing must become a collective effort. Van der Kolk calls for a trauma-informed society, one where schools, hospitals, workplaces, and communities recognize the signs of trauma and respond with compassion rather than punishment. He argues that prevention and early intervention are key, giving children safe, stable environments and emotional support before the damage becomes permanent. This chapter makes one thing clear: trauma is not the result of weakness. It is a public health crisis, and healing requires us to stop asking, "What's wrong with you?" and start asking, "What happened to you?" Chapter 7. Getting on the same wavelength, attachment and attunement. Human beings are wired for connection. From the moment we're born, our survival depends not just on food and shelter, but on emotional attunement, the ability of our caregivers to respond to our needs, soothe our distress, and mirror our emotions. In this chapter, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk explores how the early dance between child and caregiver lays the foundation for a person's lifelong ability to regulate emotions, build relationships, and feel secure in the world. This dance is more than metaphor, it's biological. Babies cannot regulate their nervous systems on their own. When a baby cries and a caregiver picks them up, gently rocks them, and coos soothingly, the child learns that distress can be calmed, that feelings can be named, and most importantly, that they are not alone. This process is called attunement, and when it happens consistently, the baby develops secure attachment, the belief that the world is safe, people can be trusted, and their own emotions are manageable. But when caregivers are inconsistent, neglectful, or frightening, this process breaks down. The child's internal world becomes chaotic. Their emotional cues are ignored, dismissed, or punished. Instead of learning that their feelings are safe and manageable, they learn to suppress them, lash out, or disconnect. Over time, these children may become anxious, avoidant, or disorganized in their attachment styles, affecting not only how they relate to others, but how they relate to themselves. Van der Kolk describes this as getting on the same wavelength. When two people are emotionally attuned, their nervous systems begin to synchronize. This can be seen in the way heart rates, facial expressions, and even brain waves mirror each other in moments of deep connection. It's what allows a parent to know instinctively when something is wrong, or for a therapist to pick up on a client's unspoken pain. Traumatized individuals, especially those with early developmental trauma, often struggle with this kind of attunement. They may find it hard to read others' emotions, or they may misinterpret neutral expressions as threatening. They often feel deeply alone, even in the presence of others. Many long for connection, but fear intimacy. Others numb themselves entirely, avoiding vulnerability at all costs. One key takeaway from this chapter is that emotional regulation is not a skill we're born with. It's something we learn through relationships. If early relationships were full of fear, confusion, or disconnection, it's not the survivor's fault that they struggle to stay calm, feel safe, or trust others later in life. Their nervous system was shaped by survival, not by safety. But healing is possible, and again, it begins in relationship. Whether through a safe therapist, a loving partner, or a trusted friend, survivors can begin to experience healthy attunement. Through eye contact, tone of voice, empathetic listening, and consistent care, the nervous system learns new patterns. It learns that it's okay to feel, that not all closeness leads to harm, and that connection can be comforting, not dangerous. Van der Kolk emphasizes that trauma healing is not just about remembering the past, it's about creating new experiences in the present. New relationships, especially ones grounded in safety and empathy, can help rewire the brain and calm the body's alarm systems. Through this kind of attuned connection, survivors learn how to be present with themselves and others, perhaps for the first time. Chapter 8. Trapped in relationships. One of the most painful effects of trauma, especially childhood trauma, is how it warps our ability to form and maintain healthy relationships. People who have been hurt in their earliest bonds often carry that pain into adulthood, not just as memories, but as a lens through which they see the world and the people in it. In this chapter, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk explains how trauma survivors often become trapped in distorted patterns of connection, especially in intimate relationships. For those who grew up in violent, neglectful, or chaotic homes, love and pain became entangled early on. The people who were supposed to protect them also hurt them. As a result, their nervous system learned that closeness equals danger, that affection may be followed by harm, and that trusting others leads to disappointment or betrayal. This emotional confusion doesn't go away just because they grow older. It becomes part of how they experience intimacy. Trauma survivors often find themselves repeating the same unhealthy patterns over and over again. They may be drawn to people who are emotionally unavailable, controlling, or abusive, not because they enjoy suffering, but because this kind of relationship feels familiar. It mimics the emotional landscape of childhood, and the unconscious mind seeks out the known, even when it's painful. These repetitions are not choices, they're survival strategies that have become outdated, running on autopilot. Van der Kolk describes how trauma can create deep feelings of shame and unworthiness, which further sabotage relationships. Survivors may believe they don't deserve love or support. They may test others' loyalty, push people away when they get too close, or become excessively clingy out of fear of abandonment. These behaviors are not signs of character flaws. They are symptoms of unresolved trauma, shaped by a nervous system that was once trained to expect rejection, betrayal, or violence. Even when a safe and loving relationship becomes available, survivors often find it hard to accept. Safety feels foreign, even suspicious. Calmness may trigger anxiety because their body is used to being on high alert. They might interpret kindness as manipulation or misread neutral expressions as signs of anger. This distorted perception makes it incredibly difficult to trust others, or even to trust themselves. Van der Kolk emphasizes that the root of these relational struggles is not weakness or stubbornness. It's biology. The brain and body, shaped by early trauma, continue to respond to present-day relationships as if the original danger is still happening. Until these patterns are brought into awareness and gently worked through, the past keeps repeating itself in the present. The good news is that these patterns can be changed. Through trauma-informed therapy, especially approaches that emphasize bodily awareness, emotional regulation, and relational healing, survivors can begin to rewire their nervous systems. They can learn to tolerate closeness, recognize healthy boundaries, and build relationships based on mutual respect and safety. But this process takes time, patience, and compassion. Most of all, it takes a new kind of relationship, one that does not re-traumatize, but helps to heal. Whether it's with a therapist, a partner, a friend, or even a community, survivors need safe spaces where they can experience a different kind of connection, one that affirms their worth, honors their feelings, and teaches them that love doesn't have to hurt. Chapter 9. Body-Brain Connection. For a long time, we believed that healing from trauma was mostly about thinking differently, changing thoughts, reprocessing memories, talking it all out. But as Dr. Bessel van der Kolk gently reminds us, trauma doesn't just live in the mind, it lives in the body. It settles deep in our muscles, our breath, our posture, our gut. The body remembers, even when the mind tries to forget. This is what's known as somatic memory. You may not remember the words someone yelled at you when you were 5, but your body remembers how it felt to freeze in fear. You may not recall the exact moment of a car crash, but your shoulders still clench at the sound of screeching tires. The trauma lives on, not as a story, but as a sensation. Many trauma survivors feel disconnected from their bodies. They may have trouble recognizing hunger, fatigue, or pain. They often say they feel numb, or like they're watching life from a distance. This is no accident. When something traumatic happens, the brain often shuts down the parts responsible for sensation and presence in order to survive. It's a brilliant protective strategy, but over time, it can leave a person feeling fragmented, lost in their own skin. Van der Kolk explains that true healing begins when we reconnect with the body, when we learn to feel again, to notice our breath, our heartbeat, our tension. This doesn't mean diving straight into painful memories. In fact, the goal is the opposite, to gently return to the body with kindness, curiosity, and safety. He introduces us to a range of body-based therapies that help trauma survivors do just that. Practices like yoga, somatic experiencing, sensorimotor psychotherapy, and neurofeedback are all designed to restore awareness and regulation. These approaches don't ask you to explain your trauma. They invite you to feel, to move, to breathe, to notice, and to stay present as you do. In yoga, for example, survivors learn how to inhabit their bodies again. A simple movement like raising an arm or feeling the floor beneath your feet becomes a way of saying, "I am here, I am safe." In somatic experiencing, the therapist helps the client become aware of sensations, like tightness in the chest or warmth in the belly, and to follow those sensations without judgment. It's about building a new language, the body's language, and learning how to listen. These physical approaches are powerful because they bypass the parts of the brain that are locked in trauma and reach the deeper, instinctual systems. The body begins to learn what safety feels like. The nervous system, once stuck in fight, flight, or freeze, can start to self-regulate. The result is not just feeling better, it's feeling more whole. Van der Kolk makes it clear that talk therapy still has its place. Understanding our stories, making sense of our past, and putting words to pain are all essential. But unless the body is included in the healing process, the deepest wounds remain untouched. This chapter is a reminder that trauma isn't just something we get over. It's something we must learn to live with and through. And the body holds the key. Healing begins not in talking but in feeling, not in controlling, but in reconnecting. When we learn to trust our bodies again, we begin to feel truly alive. Chapter 10. Uncovering the Secrets of the Body. The body is a storyteller. Long before we learn to speak, our bodies are already holding on to experiences, both joyful and painful. But while traumatic memories often leave the mind confused or blank, the body never lies. In this chapter, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk takes us deeper into the wisdom of the body, explaining how nonverbal therapies help trauma survivors uncover, understand, and ultimately heal from what words alone can't express. Trauma is not just a psychological wound, it's a physiological event. When a traumatic experience occurs, the nervous system becomes overwhelmed. The body may respond with intense fight-or-flight energy, or it may shut down completely, freezing, going numb, or dissociating. These responses are natural, even life-saving, but when the trauma isn't fully processed, the body gets stuck in that emergency state. Years may pass, but the body still acts as if the threat is ongoing. That's why simply talking about trauma doesn't always lead to relief. The mind might understand that it's over, but the body is still bracing for danger. This is where somatic therapies, which focus on bodily awareness and movement, come in. They help survivors access the parts of themselves that were silenced by fear. Van der Kolk highlights somatic experiencing, developed by Peter Levine, which gently guides individuals to pay attention to the subtle sensations in their body. Instead of reliving traumatic memories, survivors learn to notice where tension lives in their body and explore how it shifts. By following these sensations, with curiosity, not fear, they begin to discharge stuck energy and reclaim a sense of safety. Another powerful tool is yoga. In trauma-sensitive yoga, the goal is not to perform perfect poses, but to explore the body in a safe and non-judgmental way. Survivors are invited to notice what it feels like to move, to stretch, to breathe. They're given choices, to lift an arm or not, to rest or keep going. This sense of choice is key. Trauma often robs a person of agency, and yoga helps restore it by offering control over one's own body and experience. These body-based practices help trauma survivors reconnect with something they may have lost long ago: bodily autonomy. When someone is traumatized, especially in childhood or through abuse, their body becomes a place of fear, shame, or disconnection. But through somatic healing, the body can become a source of strength and presence again. Van der Kolk also discusses how these therapies rewire the brain, not by retelling the story of trauma, but by creating new, safe experiences in the body. This is what builds new neural pathways. Slowly, the brain begins to learn, I can feel this. I can survive this. I am safe now. And with time, the body's grip on the past loosens. The chapter also emphasizes the importance of nonverbal connection. Therapists, yoga teachers, and somatic practitioners often communicate not just with words, but with tone of voice, facial expressions, and body language. These subtle cues speak directly to the survivor's nervous system, reinforcing the message, you are safe, you are seen, you are in control now. Ultimately, this chapter teaches us that the body holds the keys to healing. Beneath the surface of pain and fear lies a deep wisdom, a part of us that wants to move, to breathe, to be free. And when we learn to listen with compassion, the body begins to tell a new story, not just one of survival, but of reconnection, empowerment, and peace. Chapter 11. Healing through integration. Healing from trauma is not about erasing the past. It's about finding a way to hold the pain without being overwhelmed by it, to weave what was once fragmented into something whole and meaningful. In this chapter, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk explores the process of integration, bringing together the scattered pieces of experience, memory, body, and emotion into a coherent self. Trauma shatters a person's sense of identity. One part may feel like a helpless child, another like a guarded adult. One part may carry intense fear, another complete numbness. Survivors often say things like, "Part of me knows I'm safe, but another part feels like I'm still back there." This splitting is not a flaw, it's a survival strategy. The brain divides unbearable experiences into fragments so they don't flood the system all at once. But living in fragments is exhausting. It's like trying to function with pieces of yourself locked in the past while others struggle to live in the present. True healing begins when these parts of the self are acknowledged, felt, and eventually brought together, not to forget but to make sense of the whole story. Van der Kolk explains that integration doesn't come from talking alone. It requires creating safe inner conditions where all parts of the self can come forward. Through trauma-informed therapies, such as EMDR, internal family systems, IFS, yoga, neurofeedback, and expressive arts, survivors begin to notice their inner world without judgment. They learn to say, "That part of me is scared," or "That memory still hurts," with curiosity instead of fear. This process is deeply compassionate. Instead of silencing the wounded parts, integration invites them to be heard. Instead of pushing the pain away, it allows it to be witnessed and transformed. The goal is not to relive the trauma, but to create a new relationship with it, one where the past no longer dictates the present. Van der Kolk reminds us that integration also happens through connection. Safe, supportive relationships can help rewire the nervous system. When someone listens, when someone stays present while you tell the truth of your pain, something profound happens. The burden gets lighter. The body begins to feel less alone. This is why therapy, group support, and community are so powerful. They give us mirrors in which to see ourselves as whole again. Integration is not a destination, it's a journey. There are days when the pain resurfaces, when old triggers return, when you feel divided again. But with each step forward, survivors develop more resilience, more presence, and more self-compassion. They begin to trust their bodies, their memories, their emotions, not as threats, but as messengers. The beauty of integration is that it doesn't require perfection. You don't need to be completely healed to live meaningfully. What matters is learning how to stay grounded in the present while holding space for the past. It means knowing you are more than what happened to you. You are the one who survived it, the one who is still choosing to live fully. As this chapter closes, Van der Kolk leaves us with hope. When the mind and body begin to work together, when we invite all parts of ourselves into the light, healing becomes not only possible, it becomes an act of wholeness, of reclaiming life, and of becoming fully human again. Chapter 12. The Power of Language. There's a quiet, profound power in putting words to pain. For many trauma survivors, the most damaging part of their experience wasn't just what happened, it was the silence that followed. No one listened, no one asked. Or worse, they were told to forget, to move on, to pretend. But trauma that isn't spoken becomes locked inside, often taking shape as anxiety, nightmares, tension, or unexplained shame. In this chapter, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk explains how language can be a gateway to healing, not simply through casual conversation, but through deliberate, mindful storytelling. Talking or writing about trauma helps the brain organize what was once chaotic. It shifts the experience from something that's relived over and over into something that's remembered and integrated. When a traumatic event occurs, especially when it's overwhelming or sudden, it often bypasses the brain's language centers. That's why survivors may struggle to explain what happened. The experience is encoded in flashes of imagery, bodily sensations, or fragmented emotions. Words don't come easily, but when the survivor starts to feel safe, and when given space and support, those words begin to surface. And with them comes a sense of relief, of clarity, and often of liberation. Van der Kolk highlights the value of narrative therapy, where individuals are gently guided to tell their stories, not to relive trauma, but to reclaim it. In telling the story, the survivor becomes more than a victim of the event. They become the author of their healing. They begin to say, "This happened to me, but it doesn't define me." Writing, too, has incredible healing potential. Survivors who write about their experiences, especially in a structured, reflective way, often experience emotional release, improved immune function, and decreased anxiety. Why? Because writing helps connect the dots. It forces the brain to slow down, reflect, and name what was once nameless. Van der Kolk shares stories of people who found their voice through journaling, poetry, or simply speaking out loud in a safe space. One man, who hadn't spoken of his childhood abuse in decades, finally told his story in a therapy group. As the words came out, he cried, not just from pain, but from the relief of no longer holding it in alone. But it's not just about the act of speaking, it's about being heard. A supportive listener, a therapist, friend, or group, plays a crucial role. When someone listens with compassion, the survivor begins to believe, "My story matters. I matter." This validation is often the first step toward rebuilding a shattered sense of self. Importantly, van der Kolk also emphasizes that words should not be forced. Some survivors aren't ready to talk, and that's okay. In those cases, body-based therapies can help build the safety and internal strength needed to eventually speak. The timing must be right, and the process must be gentle. The goal is not to relive the trauma, but to transform it, from something that controls the survivor to something they understand and carry with dignity. Language becomes the bridge between past and present, between pain and peace. And in that process, a survivor moves from silence to story, from isolation to connection. In the end, the power of language is not just about healing the mind. It's about reclaiming identity, finding agency, and saying to the world, "This is what happened, and here I am, still standing." Chapter 13. EMDR, Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. Healing from trauma often feels like trying to piece together a puzzle in the dark. The fragments of memory, flashes of fear, disconnected sensations, lingering shame, refuse to form a complete picture. But what if the brain could be gently guided to reorganize those fragments, to transform chaos into clarity? That's the promise of EMDR, or Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing, one of the most revolutionary trauma therapies of our time. In this chapter, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk explores how EMDR helps people reprocess traumatic memories, not by talking about them endlessly, but by activating the brain's natural ability to heal and integrate. The idea behind EMDR is deceptively simple. By using specific bilateral stimulation, often guided eye movements, while focusing on a traumatic memory, individuals can unlock that memory, revisit it safely, and help the brain digest it properly. What was once frozen in time becomes a part of the past, no longer hijacking the present. Here's how it works. In an EMDR session, the therapist asks the person to bring up a disturbing memory, just enough to notice how it feels in the body and mind. As the person holds that memory in awareness, they follow the therapist's fingers or sounds or taps, moving from side to side. This bilateral stimulation seems to mimic what happens during REM sleep, the stage of sleep where we process emotions and memories. During EMDR, something remarkable happens. Memories that once triggered intense fear, shame, or panic begin to lose their emotional charge. The images may remain, but the overwhelming feelings tied to them start to fade. The brain, given space and guidance, begins to update the story. Yes, this happened, but I'm not there anymore. I survived. Van der Kolk shares powerful stories of patients who were stuck in cycles of re-experiencing traumatic events, flashbacks, panic attacks, intrusive thoughts, and how EMDR gave them a new path forward. One woman, who had been assaulted years earlier, found that after just a few EMDR sessions, her nightmares stopped. The memory didn't vanish, but it no longer controlled her. EMDR works not by erasing trauma, but by helping the mind rewire its relationship to it. The individual is not forced to speak in detail or retell every aspect of the event. Instead, they are invited to feel and observe, gently and safely, with the therapist's support. It's a bottom-up approach, allowing the body and nervous system to lead the way, rather than relying only on logic or reasoning. What makes EMDR unique is that it doesn't just bring relief, it often brings insight. As memories are reprocessed, new understandings arise. Survivors begin to see themselves not as weak or broken, but as brave. They often realize, "I did the best I could," or "I was never to blame." These moments of clarity can be profoundly healing. Kolk emphasizes that EMDR is not a quick fix for everyone, but for many trauma survivors, it offers what few other therapies can: the chance to face the past without being overwhelmed by it, and in doing so, to reclaim the future. In a world where trauma often leaves people feeling powerless, EMDR reminds us that the brain is capable of transformation. Given the right tools and the right support, we don't just survive trauma, we grow from it. EMDR opens the door to that growth, one memory at a time. Chapter 14. Neurofeedback and Brain Rewiring. Imagine being able to watch your own brain in real time, seeing how it reacts to stress, fear, calm, or focus. Now imagine using that information to gently teach your brain how to feel more balanced, more present, more alive. That's the essence of neurofeedback, a powerful tool that helps trauma survivors retrain the brain and restore emotional regulation. In this chapter, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk introduces us to the science and healing potential of neurofeedback, a non-invasive technique that uses technology to monitor brain activity and guide the brain toward healthier patterns. For people who've experienced trauma, this can be life-changing. Trauma can disrupt the brain's rhythm. Instead of moving smoothly between states of rest, alertness, and deep focus, the traumatized brain often gets stuck. It may stay hypervigilant, always scanning for danger, or it may shut down, leaving the person feeling numb and disconnected. Over time, this dysregulation affects sleep, attention, memory, and even relationships. Neurofeedback works by helping the brain see itself, and with feedback, adjust its own functioning. The process is simple yet profound. Small sensors are placed on the scalp to read brainwave activity. This data is then fed into a computer, which translates it into visuals or sounds. For example, a video game might play when the brain is in a calm, focused state, and pause when the brain becomes agitated or distracted. The brain, like a curious student, begins to learn. It figures out what helps the game continue, what states feel smooth, safe, and rewarding. With repeated sessions, the brain gradually rewires itself, strengthening its ability to regulate emotions, focus attention, and remain present. Van der Kolk describes neurofeedback as a bottom-up therapy, meaning it doesn't require words, insight, or even conscious effort. That makes it especially helpful for children or adults who struggle to talk about their trauma. It bypasses the need to explain what happened and instead helps the brain heal at the biological level. One of the most striking benefits of neurofeedback is its ability to reduce symptoms of PTSD, anxiety, and ADHD. Many patients report sleeping better, feeling calmer, and experiencing fewer emotional outbursts. For trauma survivors, this return to inner balance can feel like a miracle after years of chaos. But neurofeedback is not magic. It requires commitment, multiple sessions over weeks or months, and it works best when paired with other healing practices, such as therapy, mindfulness, or body-based treatments. Still, its results are often long-lasting because it taps into the brain's own neuroplasticity, its natural ability to change and adapt. Van der Kolk emphasizes that the goal of neurofeedback is not perfection, it's self-regulation, the ability to return to calm after stress, to think clearly under pressure, and to stay grounded in the present moment. These are the building blocks of a healthy life, especially after trauma. This chapter reminds us that healing isn't only emotional or psychological, it's also neurological. When we give the brain the tools to see itself and grow, we empower survivors to reclaim control over their lives, not through willpower, but through real, measurable transformation. Chapter 15. Theater, Movement, and Play. Trauma isolates. It locks people inside their own bodies, silences their voices, and steals their sense of connection. But healing doesn't always begin with words. It can start with movement, rhythm, creativity, and the joy of play. In this chapter, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk shows us how expressive and community-based practices like theater, movement, and play can help trauma survivors reconnect with themselves and with the world. When someone experiences trauma, especially in childhood, their ability to feel safe in their body and in relationships is often shattered. They may struggle to read social cues, to feel spontaneous, or to trust others. Traditional talk therapy can help, but sometimes the most profound healing comes from experiencing connection in real time, not just talking about it. That's where creative arts and performance come in. Theater, for instance, allows people to step into different roles, to explore emotions and stories in a safe, structured environment. Van der Kolk shares how participating in theater helped trauma survivors rediscover their voices, their bodies, and their agency. When a person plays a character, they learn to express anger, fear, or love, not as something dangerous, but as something human. They rehearse new ways of being, and in doing so, they begin to rewrite their own narratives. Similarly, movement-based therapies like dance, yoga, and improvisation bypass the need for intellectual processing and go straight to the core of the trauma, the body. Many survivors feel frozen, numb, or disconnected from their physical selves. Movement restores the ability to feel, to breathe deeply, to notice tension and release. It brings people back into their bodies and into the present moment. Children especially benefit from this approach. Traumatized kids often can't sit still and talk about their feelings, but they can play, pretend, and move. Through games, role-playing, and group activities, they learn to regulate their emotions, build trust, and experience joy again. In fact, play isn't just fun, it's a form of rehearsal for life. It teaches flexibility, creativity, and connection, all of which trauma tends to suppress. Crucially, these experiences happen in community. Healing doesn't occur in isolation. When people sing, dance, or act together, they build attunement, a sense of being seen, heard, and felt. This relational safety is at the heart of recovery. Many trauma survivors grew up in environments where connection was dangerous or absent. Creative group experiences offer a new model. Connection can be safe. It can even be joyful. Van der Kolk points out that trauma is fundamentally an experience of helplessness. But in theater, movement, and play, people get to make choices. They direct scenes, control their breath, decide when to speak or move. These seemingly small acts build a foundation of self-agency, the belief, I can affect my world. This chapter is a powerful reminder that healing is not only a cognitive journey, it is emotional, physical, and social. Sometimes what trauma has broken apart, voice, body, connection, must be rebuilt not with talk, but with expression, ritual, and relationship. To dance without fear, to laugh with others, to step into a spotlight and say, "This is my story." These are acts of defiance against trauma's silence. They are proof that joy, spontaneity, and love can return. Chapter 16. Becoming a whole person. Again. For those who have lived through trauma, wholeness can feel like a distant dream, something lost in the storm of fear, shame, and disconnection. But the truth is, healing is possible. Not overnight, not through a single method, but through a journey of reclaiming safety, rebuilding trust, and reconnecting with oneself and others. This final chapter is about that journey, about becoming whole again. Trauma fragments us. It shatters our sense of safety, splits our identities, and creates walls where connection should be. Survivors often carry invisible wounds, a racing heart that never slows down, a deep mistrust of others, or an overwhelming sense that something is fundamentally broken inside. But as Dr. Bessel van der Kolk emphasizes, the body, brain, and soul all possess a remarkable capacity to heal. to slowly knit those broken pieces back together. Recovery isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about learning how to live with the past without being defined or dominated by it. At the heart of healing is safety, both physical and emotional. Survivors need environments where they aren't judged, blamed, or re-traumatized. They need space where their stories are held with respect and care, whether in a therapist's office, a yoga studio, or a support group. Safety is the foundation upon which all other healing is built. Equally important is trust. Trauma erodes trust in others, and even more painfully, in ourselves. Survivors often doubt their perceptions, their memories, and their emotions. The healing process slowly restores that inner compass. With the right support, people begin to feel, I can trust myself again. I know what I need. I can set boundaries. I can choose who I let in. And then comes reconnection, with the body, with emotions, with creativity, with other human beings. Trauma isolates, but healing is relational. Through therapies like EMDR, neurofeedback, movement, or theater, survivors learn how to feel safely, how to speak, how to be seen. They begin to understand their triggers and soothe their nervous systems. They become more present, more grounded, more alive. Van der Kolk reminds us that healing is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the trauma and reclaiming the parts of yourself that were lost or buried. It's about becoming a whole person again, not perfect, not untouched by pain, but resilient, aware, and deeply connected to life. Each person's path to wholeness is unique. Some find strength in therapy, others in art, nature, community, or spirituality. What matters is that they keep moving forward, step by step, toward the life they deserve. A life filled not just with survival, but with meaning, joy, and love. In the end, this chapter is a celebration, a reminder that the human spirit, though battered, can bend without breaking, that within each of us is the power to heal, to grow, and to rise, not in spite of our wounds, but because of them. This is what it means to become whole again. Trauma is a universal part of the human experience. Whether it stems from childhood neglect, war, abuse, accidents, or loss, nearly everyone carries invisible wounds. These wounds do not just live in the mind. They leave deep imprints on the brain and the body, shaping how we feel, think, and relate to the world. But trauma is not the end of the story. What Dr. Bessel van der Kolk makes clear in this book is that healing is possible, and that it comes not from forgetting, but from facing the pain with compassion, curiosity, and courage. True recovery is not just about changing thoughts or suppressing symptoms. It requires a whole-person approach, one that honors the body, the brain, and the mind as partners in the healing process. Healing means reclaiming a sense of safety, agency, and connection. It means learning to be present in your body again, feeling your emotions without being overwhelmed by them, and rebuilding trust, both with yourself and others. This kind of recovery takes time, support, and often a variety of tools, from therapy and neurofeedback to yoga, theater, and mindfulness. What brings hope is not just the science, but the stories of real people who have suffered deeply, yet found ways to grow, to love, and to live fully again. Their journeys show us that trauma may shape us, but it does not have to define us. We now live in a time where trauma is more recognized than ever before, and with that recognition comes responsibility to listen, to support, and to keep exploring innovative treatments that honor the complexity of human suffering and the extraordinary capacity for human resilience. The body keeps the score, but with care, patience, and understanding, the body and mind can also rewrite the story, one of survival, transformation, and wholeness.